It's no secret that nowadays negativity sells. Wade through the sewage-filled waters of the internet for a second and you'll see countless streamers with videos titled "The End of Gaming" or "Why Old Games Are Better." And I'll be honest, normally I'm the sort of lad that ignores these prophets of doom. The world is always incredibly flawed and screwed up, and it's often much easier to reach into a vision of a purer past than offer practical solutions to actually improve things. But there's one genre where I'm sad to say this pessimistic narrative is backed up by a wealth of data because, well, it's my favorite one: the action RPG. I first came to this realization last week when for the 1000th time I was pulled into the world of CD Projekt Red's role-playing masterclass, The Witcher 3. At this point, playing The Witcher has almost become a religious commitment to me. Like a loner's call to prayer, every now and then I get the insatiable urge to load it up again and see how far I can get until I realize the outside world also exists. But my last playthrough was interrupted by a disturbing thought. You see, midway through that White Orchard quest, we are trying to find out who burnt down the resident dwarven smith's forge. A troubling thought disrupted my escapism and pulled me into the depressing reality of the modern game industry. Does it get better than this? You see, I couldn't think of a single title in the 9 years since The Witcher 3 came out that's beaten it at its own game. In that same period, I've graduated from university, grown credible facial hair, and experimented with chemical reactions. And in many ways, I've become a completely different person. And yet, at this current moment in time, with the wealth of post-2015 RPGs I've played, I couldn't think of one that surpassed The Witcher 3, that truly offered an experience so distinct and well-crafted in the entire action RPG genre since it came out. At first, I was so troubled by the implications of what I had just said that I tried to convince myself that it was just me, that I'd officially reached my old man stage, and 10 years later I'd be slumped on an AI-powered armchair, ruining the day Fallout went AR. But something at the back of my mind just told me there was more to this. So I began to investigate, scouring dozens of forum posts, YouTube videos, and user data that all led me to the same conclusion: that from the start of the PS3 era in 2006 to the dawn of the PS4 one in 2015, there was a golden age of the action RPG, and now it's over. This complete reality check was a difficult pill for me to swallow at first, which also happens to be the first line in Bill Cosby's police report. But you might ask, why are you so sure there was a golden age? What does that even mean? And how did we get to where we are now?
We're going into the fade, aren't we?
Well, if you stay on, I'll do my best to answer both questions. A golden age for me is a time period where new ideas and formulas flourish, and these raw ideas are molded into polished masterpieces. And 2006 to 2015 certainly fits this description. In these years, so many beloved franchises emerged that the next 9 years seems almost menopausal in its dryness. We're talking about the Dragon Age franchise, the Mass Effect franchise, the Witcher franchise, the modern Elder Scrolls formula, the Bethesda Fallout franchise, the Dragon's Dogma franchise, the Assassin's Creed franchise, the Souls franchise. I could go on. But since 2015, we've seen barely any new IPs and franchises emerge. In fact, the genre has become increasingly derivative. Nearly every exciting new release by the titans of the action RPG genre in this period was born from a series established or made during the Golden Age. In fact, the only truly new IP, which I don't think Elden Ring qualifies as, that achieved widespread critical and commercial acclaim is the Horizon Zero Dawn series and Cyberpunk 2077. And this is a trend that carries to the less successful but well-liked releases. Just think, what are the most anticipated big action RPG releases this year? You could go to Kingdom Come Deliverance, or perhaps iCarly the Veilguard. Dragon Age the Veilguard. Very similar aesthetics. But the industry hasn't just run out of ideas, but quality as well. And the sales data backs this up. You see, old games are selling better than new ones. The top 5 best-selling action RPGs of all time are as follows: Skyrim, The Witcher 3, Fallout 4, Elden Ring, and Cyberpunk 2077. Now, at face value, it might sound fairly close, 3 from the Golden Age versus 2 now. But if you look at the raw numbers, a very different story begins to emerge. Not only did the combined sales of the top 2 continue to surpass the rest, but they managed to outsell a high proportion of new releases in the same time period. Skyrim, from the 2016 release of Dark Souls 3 to 2023, not only radically outsold the title, but nearly beat the entire sales of the Soul franchise as well. And this is 5 years after it was released. And a similar story emerges for The Witcher, or Fallout 3. And this is a worrying trend, not because sales equal quality. They don't, but because they equal appeal. And if old games are outselling new ones a decade after release, it suggests that a whole new generation are deciding that the past was just better. And if you don't believe me and you think I'm exaggerating, can you name, apart from Elden Ring, a single action RPG classic from the years of 2015 to 2024 that doesn't include The Witcher 3? I can't. Starfield, the biggest release of this period, is larger and more empty than Boogie
As time
2918.
went on, I became aware that it might not.
But you might be asking, what caused this decline into derivativeness and low quality? Well, before I go into the why, I want to remind you guys to like, subscribe and leave a comment if you're enjoying the video. It will help me meet my ambitious target, pumping out another video before the release of Fallout 5. Anyway, back to things. At first, I had no idea how to answer this question. All of the conventional explanations, from greed to technological shifts to an obsession with graphics, seemed to be missing a key connective tissue, an underlying theme that tied them all together like a chain gang of concepts. So I took a terrifying leap for a gaming content creator, and I decided to think for myself. And after a long period of intellectual meltdown, which also happens to be the title of Biden's presidential biography, I finally found an explanation that manages to explain all the things going wrong in the game industry. Wokeness. Nah, I'm joking. Calm down. You don't need to transition to another video. Nah, the real reason is audience capture. Now, you may have heard this term elsewhere, but just in case you haven't, I'll explain what it means. Audience capture describes when an organization or individual changes their product, opinions, or approach to please a certain demographic, and not because of their own personal preferences. You know, like when a politician suddenly has an epiphany and completely changes all their positions, when doing so just happens to increase their chances to win power. Or when a content creator bases all their opinions on what happens to be popular in their community, just to get views. You know who I'm referring to. Now, in the context of the game industry itself, however, I'm using it to refer to when design choices are consciously made to appeal to a certain demographic, regardless of the dev's personal opinions. So we're talking about a development approach that's audience versus creative-led. Now, as I'm sure you're probably thinking already, isn't some degree of audience capture inevitable? Well, yes, because game companies have to find a large enough niche outside of their own circle to make ends meet. So they can't just make something so specific to their preferences that it becomes completely unmarketable to anyone else. And so certain storytelling techniques and gaming features will be included to make their titles accessible to a wide enough audience. Unless you're Hideo Kojima. Because that guy is like the Japan Mafia of gaming. Nothing he does should work, and women will never understand it, but it just somehow manages to bang every single time. But he's a rare exception. For the most part, developers try to meet the public where they're currently at. These focus group safe games, the sort of ones that IGN would refer to as polished, are a dime a dozen in the post-Golden Age action RPG space, and are a major reason for the drop in quality. But I'm sure you're thinking, why has this extreme audience capture become more of a pattern in the last 9 years than the previous 9? Haven't these incentives always been around? Well, to explain what changed and how it led to the current situation, I'm going to use the story of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Our tale begins in 2008 with the release of Iron Man. It's strange to think of it this way now. At the time, Marvel Studios was a completely unknown entity. Superhero films have achieved individual or even series successes, but the unique Marvel style of filmmaking and franchise creating was new and fresh. When Iron Man came out, it proved not only that this formula worked, but that it was able to dominate the mainstream and bring a whole new audience to the superhero genre. And with this recognition came money. And with money came a renaissance of the genre. We're talking the Avengers, Thor, and Guardians of the Galaxy. Countless classic IPs were created, but this very success also sowed the seeds of the genre's decline. You see, after the unprecedented success of Ultron and Infinity War, Marvel realized they had reached the perfect formula for commercial dominance with the Avengers, and so they thought, why take any more risks and try to, come up with new ideas and exciting new concepts when we can just take a formula that works and copy and paste it onto other franchises? Now, this is where the accusations that Marvel films are like theme parks from the likes of Martin Scorsese comes in. And you can hardly disagree with him. The titles that followed the Avengers and were created in this period all had the same trademark sense of humor.
Hey, how's your girl, man?
She left me.
Oh. Yeah, my mom died too. And my dad got deported. But I got the van.
It's nice.
Yeah, right?
Narrative structure, and constant inter-film cameos. Now at first, as the execs correctly predicted, the public couldn't get enough. Anything Marvel was an instant success, and the directors and writers that ran the show were able to add just enough of a unique flair for these new cash grabs to seem worth watching. But at a certain point, Marvel overstepped. They had saturated the market with too much generic content at too fast a pace, and audiences took note. Marvel fatigue began to creep in, and that audience they built started to flee. Several flops followed, and the ones that were successful were either well-established, high-level IPs like Deadpool, or were simply no longer guaranteed the $50 to $1 billion grosses that they were used to in the previous period. Skyrim was the Iron Man of the action RPG genre. When it came out, it offered a product so universally compelling, it brought a whole new audience to the genre that had never played an Elder Scrolls or action RPG game before, and in doing so, fundamentally changed the expectations of the industry. You see, in the pre-Skyrim PS3 era, when so many Golden Age titles emerged, selling a few million copies represented massive financial success. Mass Effect 2, one of the best titles of this era, only sold 2 million units in its first week. So when Skyrim came out and deservedly sold 7 in its first week and 10 mil in its first month and didn't stop, it completely altered what devs thought was possible. 2 million was fine in 2010, but after Skyrim it seemed like pennies. So as a consequence, studios completely shifted their approach to meet this new mainstream audience. But you don't have to take my word for it. As the executive producer of Dragon Age Inquisition put it in a 2014 interview, Skyrim changed the landscape for role-playing games completely. I mean, Oblivion probably sold 6 million units, basically that range. Skyrim sold 20 million. So that, to some degree, changes everything. Now suddenly you have 15 million people have basically had the first RPG they've ever played as Skyrim. They have a completely different expectation of what storytelling is, what exploration is, and I think exploration is really where we've seen the biggest change. As with the MCU, the new mainstream attention this brought to the genre was great for it at first. You see, it enabled even fairly small studios like CG Projekt Red to reasonably justify throwing immense amounts of money into extremely ambitious products just because they knew there was an audience. That's how we get games like The Witcher 3 and even Dragon Age Inquisition, which I would say is still up there as one of the best games in this period. But like with the post-Avengers MCU, this didn't last for very long. You see, the larger studios realized that the mainstream audience primarily cared about accessibility and familiarity more than innovation, because they're casual. As Mark said, they aren't long-term players. They came with Skyrim or they came with the big games in the genre, and they don't really understand the rest. So just present them with something similar and they'll be fine. And studios realize this. So they thought, why invest in the unlikely prospect of creating a Witcher or a Skyrim when you can just add the sort of accessibility features that enabled a game like Skyrim to an existing franchise without, doing all that risky innovation, taking all the reward and none of the risk. This wouldn't have worked in the Golden Age, simply because to sell to the much more hardcore audience action RPG developers were aiming for in this period required experimentation. You needed to stand out. These gamers valued experimentation over familiarity and comfort. They wanted something new. And so devs were incentivized to constantly create new IPs and experiment with fresh ideas. But when you're dealing with a large mainstream audience, accessibility and comfort is the most important thing. And so you see studios shift towards having the best graphics,
ray tracing,
the biggest worlds, with the same accessible minimap, UI, quest design, and very basic choices and consequences as a standard. Now, as I hinted before, just like with Marvel, financially this worked at first. Assassin's Creed is the perfect example of a franchise that has produced boatloads of cash because of its ability to adapt to current trends so effectively. Like a gender-fluid comedian, it lost any semblance of its identity. But as with MCU fatigue, gamers are starting to take note and are becoming increasingly dissatisfied with every new AAA game. And this is a big reason why I felt compelled to write this. You see, I reached my breaking point as well this year with the Dragon Age 4 reveal. Dragon Age 4, now known as the Veilguard, which also happens to be the name of the Saudi morality police, is a premier case study for audience capture. It was initially conceived as a way to take advantage of the multiplayer craze. Higher-ups tasked the devs to create a high-space multiplayer game that integrated live service elements. But after Anthem comprehensively revealed no one wants this, and proper RPGs went back into vogue, development shifted gears towards an actually playable format known as the single-player action RPG. But this obsession with mass appeal still infested every pore of the new game's DNA, and fans like myself found this out at the Xbox Showcase. Instead of a game that follows in the innovative roots of BioWare, we were given a by-the-numbers action RPG with an Ava Tyson-approved art style, which also happens to be a pretty good description of the industry as a whole. But I don't want to end on a sour note. The abdication of quality by the mainstream has opened the door for mid-tier studio revival. We've already seen the seeds of this shift bear fruit with the success of games like Kingdom Come, and hopefully if the sequel becomes a massive hit while staying to its roots, it might convince other smaller developers looking to make their name that the best way to compete against the Ubisofts and the EA is to play a different game. But what do you guys think? Is the action RPG in terminal decline, or am I just exaggerating? Let me know, and like and subscribe if you want more content like this.